Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. And we're going to begin this week a series, and I haven't done that many series in Space for Life history, but this is a series I'm really excited about. We're going to be talking about the subject of marriage and how we might do marriage well. But for those who are listening who may not be married, may not even be interested in being married, I still think there's going to be a lot that's very relevant to talk about and to listen to in this series, because at the core, everything that we talk about in this series is really just about how do we love well?
Mhm.
How do we love another human being well? And that has to do with how we love our extended family well. It has to do with how we love friends well. It even has to do with how we love God well, which we'll get into. So, this series, while we're going to be focusing it kind of around the marriage relationship, which I think is probably the most challenging of all relationships, it's really, in that sense, a deep dive in how do we love well. And this is also part of what I kind of realized coming at it. And I spoke about this a little bit in my last solo episode, is about how to play the long game of life. That is, what are the things that we do that impact the long game of who we are 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now. And in essence, there's no more significant long game than marriage. So my guest today is Tom Barilla, and I'll get a little bit into an introduction. But Tom, how long have you been married?
41 years.
41 years. Well, you're a newbie because I've been 42 years. So, that I think qualifies as the long game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Just so excited to be still part of that adventure. And just like you said, it's a fantastic adventure, but it's hard work.
It's hard work. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Well, so Tom and I go way back, Tom Barilla, and it's really interesting, kind of the full circle that we've experienced over now, many decades of getting to know one another. We got to know one another through the church that we attended at that time, Third Presbyterian Church. And Tom was on staff there overseeing Christian education, as I understand it, discipleship and Christian education. And I had about a decade and a half of teaching Sunday school, an adult Sunday school class there. And so we became friends through all of that. But I remember kind of part of the full circle of coming to you and sitting in your little cubbyhole office one afternoon and saying, Tom, we got a problem. You know, this is a phenomenal church and everything, but we're not doing anything to help people in their marriages. And I had become kind of, I guess, acutely aware of that in teaching the Sunday school class that I taught, when one of the kind of the foremost couples in the church completely blindsided everybody and separated on their way to divorce. And it was like this eye opener for all of us that, wow, if that could happen to them, what's happening behind closed doors that we don't know? What are we doing to help people? And so I became aware of that and came to you and said, well, Tom, we've got a problem. You've got to do something about this. And you kind of looked at me and went, you got to do it. You do it.
Yeah, I really remember that time, and it was so great because I just know the impact you were having with the church in terms of nurturing relationships, building up the body. But I was also caught off guard by that incident that you're referring to, and it was a good wake up call because we want to be alerted to the real needs of the church and of our community, and actually the need of our country to have healthy marriages that show our children and those that we love and care how to the light of the world, but also to have a great time together and to be supportive.
Yeah, and it's a great way of putting it. It's a wake up call because I think that the whole issue of marriage is a kind of it's a quiet epidemic. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we all know the statistics of how many marriages end up in divorce. And so many of those are those surprise marriages. But there's also the, untold statistics of all of the people that we think are doing so well in their relationships. But once that front door closes, things are rocky
Mm-hmm.
and they're tough and they're on the edge and they're really destroying good people. And the two people that we're talking about in that particular instance, they're good people.
Mm-hmm.
And we go, well, how could this happen? And I think that's happening all over. And so we need to be able to talk about the hard
Mm-hmm.
and the good and how do we help one another. So that's a lot of what this podcast series is about. So we got started,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the marriage piece of this with that incident, and then now a couple of decades later, it comes full circle, and I'm doing other things now, the life coaching and podcasting and writing, and you're now a marriage coach.
Yes, that was about 25 years ago, believe it or not, Tommy.
Wow.
Yes. So that shows our age a little bit.
Yeah, I was 10 years old.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. 10 years old. So, yeah, here we are now, you being married 42 years and me 41. And, I love marriage coaching because I love people. And just like you started off the conversation a few minutes ago, it really is about caring for people and loving people and being present for them. One of my new favorite sayings is the present of presence, the present
Mhm.
of presence. Like, how can we be present for one another? And of course, the most important relationship in the world is with our spouse. So, how are we making sure that we're being present to our spouse in the day to day grind of life?
Yeah, so we've got a lot to talk about, and this series is going to span 5 episodes. And Tom and I are going to do 3 of them together and explore a whole bunch of different topics, within the topic of
Mhm.
marriage. And then I have a couple of guests coming on also that will speak different kind of wisdom into this. But before we kind of get into that, I think it'd be helpful for those listening that may not know you to just hear a little bit of your story of, what you've done in your life, but particularly what's led to this area of marriage coaching that you're going to do. And then we're going to also explore what in the world is a marriage coach. That is I guess a job description
Mhm.
that 2.5 decades ago didn't
Yes,
exist.
exactly.
So yeah, so tell us your story.
Yeah, so just like you said, Tommy, I was part of a wonderful church community, and part of my responsibility was nurturing marriages and men's ministry and other areas of the church. I was watching, and there was always this perception that people's lives were really in beautiful shape and that outside veneer. And then you just find out once you get in behind a door into the person's living room or kitchen, you find out what the real struggles are. So for us in our culture, we think everybody looks squared away, but
Right.
there's a lot that's going on. So we all share together the trials and challenges and storms of life that we need to support each other through. So that's sort of my entry into this 25 years ago. In addition to being married 41 years, my father-in-law gave me this incredible challenge when I first proposed to Elizabeth, 43 years ago. And the challenge was I was old school, so I asked permission to marry Elizabeth. And he said, under one condition. And I said, sure, any condition. He says, well, when you have challenges of life, you'll take the topic of divorce off the table. And at the time, after dating for 2 years, Elizabeth and I were doing great. So no issues, no problems.
No
So
brainer.
no brainer, like
Yeah.
that sign here. Hey, let's do that. And so, fast forward 10 years, we have a couple kids, had to move cities, a couple different jobs. the challenges of life, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that promise I made to my
Yes.
sweet father-in-law, who I adored, and his my mother-in-law, is like that was a great promise that I made, but also a great challenge because once we take that that topic off the table, then we're going to look for solutions to nurture and support each other and figure out how to fix what we need to fix.
Yeah, that's so good. And doing what you do as a marriage coach, and I've done enough coaching and mentoring of people. Uh, I don't think either one of us takes that lightly.
Mhm.
We know how hard and how deep and how painful the struggles will be. To stay in is not a small thing. It's not a simple little vow
Mhm.
that you make like we do generally, in a marriage ceremony. It is a major, major commitment that in almost every situation will get tested.
Yes, and that saying like we're either in a storm, leaving a storm, or entering a storm. I think that's applicable in a marriage context, but there's a lot of beautiful still waters and beautiful sailing.
Sure.
So don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, but there's challenges that will come. So we don't want to be surprised. We want to be equipped, and we
Right.
want to be ready yeah, we want to be ready.
Yeah. And, while we're going to talk about a lot of the pitfalls, and today in this episode, particularly some of the minefields, we're also going to talk about how do we begin to find, beautiful life in marriage? How
Mhm.
do we recover sometimes the very best of what we have in marriage? So it's not going to all just be dealing with problems. The other thing that just comes to mind that I think is worth saying is that there's often a lot of shame around our marriages and around the fact that our marriages are more difficult than we'd like to admit. And one of the things that I remember struck me 25 years ago in that particular situation is I think both the husband and wife were in small groups.
Mhm.
They were in the types of groups that you would think would have provided them some type of shelter and place for them to enter into when their marriage was going difficult. But it that didn't exist.
Mhm.
Even in small groups, people hide
Mhm.
these difficult things. And that's worth diving into more, but it just accentuates all the more the the shame I think that is around the difficulties of marriage, and of course parenting also
Mhm.
within this, that somehow um, we need to uncover that stuff.
Yeah.
We need to shine a light on it and say, you know what, we're all in this together, you know, in the storm, before the storm, after the storm. So
Yeah, statistically, they say it takes 2 to 3 years for a couple to ask for support. So, to your point, Tommy, I love it when some of those issues start arising. Like, let's jump in and start seeking support. Build your life team.
yeah,
Get the right folks to support you, and that can be, I like to share about your 2 a.m. friends. Getting allies on your side to understand the issues that we're working through, to be able to flip some of our disappointments into things that are our hopes and our dreams. So disappointments are really gateways to our what we want.
yeah,
So take those disappointments and let's look at what we're really hoping for, and that again leads into being able to discuss it with your spouse to
yeah.
work that out.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that we'll do in this whole series is we're going to hopefully be intensely practical
Mhm.
in this. So, one of the first practical takeaways I think from this is open up to the possibility of getting help.
Absolutely,
You know,
and the sooner the better.
the sooner the better. It doesn't You don't have to have a marriage on the rocks to find someone, whether it's a counselor or a coach or just another friend
Mhm.
or couple, to just say, "Hey, look, you know, let's talk about some
Mhm.
things." So I know that's hard for all of us, but it is so critical. So that's like a first takeaway of many, hopefully, in
Yes.
this
Yes.
series. So let's dive into a couple of things more on your side before we get into what we're going to call minefields. First of all, my understanding is you describe yourself as a marriage coach. What's the difference between a marriage coach and a marriage counselor as you think about it?
Yeah, the profession of marriage coaching has been around for almost 30 years. So
Hmm.
I didn't really know that until I decided to seek specific training in that area and also to be sharpened in that arena of coaching. So taking basically 30 years of that industry and that expertise of working on relationships, it kind of boils down to like four or five major things. One is we're always trying to find out a person's motivation of why they're doing what they're doing, either positively or negatively.
Within the relationship.
Correct.
Okay. Hmm.
So for example, on motivation, I'll just use an example of like working out. Maybe that's not a great example, but I'll use working out. I work out because I want to sleep well.
Hmm.
I want to play with my grandchildren, and I also want to be available to my friends and to my wife. So that motivates me to do my 10,000 steps or workout. So we're coaching is always about being curious and understanding our motivations, and also having the client articulate what they're hoping for. Sometimes they don't know what they're asking for, but that's part of the discovery process is to do that. And then we also, coaches really want to give action items and practices and habits. So my definition of habits is habits give us the results we want without thinking about it. Habits
Okay.
give us the results we want without thinking about it. So we want clean teeth, we brush our teeth. We want good communications with our spouse, we make time for it. So we try to embed all these habits and practices that give us the results we want without thinking about it. So that's another thing coaches really want to do.
Yeah. The automatic things that happen for good or bad,
Yes.
and so, if you're able to have good habits, then you're in essence creating a pathway
Mhm.
to automatic good life. And if you have bad habits, you drink too much or whatever, you've got an automatic pathway
Yes,
to the gutter.
exactly. So we
Yeah.
want to set ourselves up for success for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that we have a lot of inner wisdom. Coaches really believe that the inner wisdom of the client. And but the on the tension side is that we know ourselves really well, but sometimes we don't see ourselves clearly. So
Yeah.
part of the coaching process is to be really attentive and ask good questions to help see themselves in a different light to help them take the next right step.
Well, I love that. We know ourselves well, but we often don't see ourselves clearly. And that's true for us as individuals. And it's also true as couples, that couples know their stuff, who they are very well, but often they don't see their relationship objectively or with clarity. And I would imagine a coach is able to see things about even a couple that they don't know that well more accurately and with more clarity than that couple can themselves.
Absolutely, we kind of try to be objective, and we can just see it like as clear as day. And
Yeah.
that's why they're blind spots because they don't see it.
Yes. Yeah. Great. So that gives just a little bit of a taste. And before we dive in, like if a couple came to you and said, okay, we're coming to you as marriage coach, our relationship is not on the rocks, but we think we could use a little help. Where would you typically begin with them?
I am so excited to work with couples like that, and I have a good number of clients that are or couples, excuse me, that are seeking that kind of support on the front end. They want to establish a really good foundation. They really do want to flourish, and they want to be able to anticipate some of those pitfalls or minefields before they happen, so that they have a plan of action.
Yeah.
So I am very excited when a couple comes to me and wants to do that. So I see a fair number of couples like that. One of the first things I do is when we start meeting, we want to establish a really safe and secure environment. What I mean by secure is that they're open to being able to say whatever they want to say, and I'll be able to be there to alleviate any kind of tension, but also to be able to be really seen and heard. And that's a gift that we want to always give each other, is a
Sure.
place where we can really be seen and heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, we will certainly, towards the end of this episode, we'll make sure we get all of your contact information and have that in the show notes. And I know there are a lot of other coaches out there. So the encouragement is to find someone, to go to have a team on your side of your marriage, whether it's going absolutely great or whether it's suffering a bit, one way or another.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great call to action right there.
Yeah. All right. So in this episode, what I want to really try to do, I wouldn't say it's a super deep dive because we've got a lot of territory to cover, but I want to kind of take a little bit of your experience with marriage coaching
Hmm.
and my experience, not only as a life coach, but as a result of that conversation 25 years ago. For a couple of years, I taught a year-long class
Yes.
on marriage and did a pretty deep dive myself into, all of the nuances of marriage. What I want to, I guess, address is kind of a two sides of a coin. One is, what are some of the most significant minefields that you've seen, I've seen, and we'll have a back and forth conversation on this, that we've seen that threaten marriage. And I'm not
Mm.
talking about just the day-to-day quabbles. I'm talking about the stuff that can blow up a minefield, that can blow up. You're walking along and you step on it,
Mm.
and now you have something that if you don't do something about it, you got a real serious problem. So, what are some of the minefields? And then we're going to flip the coin and then talk about what are some of the characteristics that of the healthiest marriages. So, we're going to look at both sides so that we can identify what we should all have our guard on.
Mm.
And then we can also identify maybe some pathways that we need to explore. So, I'd love maybe we can just go back and forth on this a little bit, but what are some of the minefields that you've seen in the marriages that you've coached or just your experience?
Yeah, the one that bubbles up to the top for me is one that might be a little counterintuitive, and I'll try to explain it, but it's basically a self-care deficit, that we're just not
Mm.
taking care of ourselves and
Wow.
what's on our side of the street.
That's really interesting. How is that a minefield?
If we're not taking care of ourselves, and when I say self-care, we'll get into the details here in a second, but self-care is the physical, emotional, mental, and the spiritual. So if we're
Mm.
not taking care of ourselves physically, for example, eating well, healthy habits, you mentioned possibly, overindulging and whatever,
Yeah.
that's going to affect us. How are we doing with our sleeping habits? Are we getting a good night rest? Those things should never be overlooked. Uh,
I really like that. And, it's interesting. While we kind of prepared an outline of where we're going with this, I don't really know which minefields you're going to suggest and giving you a little bit of a hint to mine. But in a fairly short list of minefields that I put in, I have one very similar to that. It's a slight nuance to that. And what I call it is uneven growth.
hmm,
And that's when one person in the marriage is not doing well, when one person is really unhappy or their life is going in a bad direction, it becomes a minefield because as long as that person is not well in whatever sense, the self care that you talk about, then it threatens the whole thing because it only takes one person
Hmm.
for a marriage to go awry. I
Hmm.
mean, there's some really great marriages of people that, we all, if a marriage goes wrong, we all bear some responsibility, but it's not always even. And if someone is not taking care of themselves, if someone is not in a healthy place, physically, emotionally, spiritually, then that is a huge threat to the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one metaphor that I really appreciate to help guide us in a different way of supporting the other person is, hey, take care of what you can control on your side of the street,
Right.
right? So do your part. And then using this boat metaphor, the two of you are in a boat and you might have to pedal the person who is having who's in a good spot. They're going to be paddling for kind of the both of them for a time being.
Right.
And that's part of how we give ourselves away to our spouse
Yeah.
is taking up the slack because guess what? Later on, it's going to be a reciprocal arrangement.
Sure. And it goes back to what your father-in-law was suggesting at the beginning is that there may even likely be seasons in a marriage where it's not all that much fun, where one person is doing more of the paddling than the other person. And it is rocky. And that takes, I think, incredible character and patience to
Mm.
be in that situation that, as you say, you can't control and you can't fix. And yet, it's so important that you are supportive and patient and persevering in that situation, regardless of not being able to see when, a horizon which this might end.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Tommy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. I didn't expect that one. And self-care, we can probably get into that a little bit more, but the self-care in one sense is a bit intuitive.
Yes. Yeah, and it's also, if it's okay, if we just do a quick little dive into the self care, it's
Yeah.
also, controlling your tongue.
Okay.
It's recognizing some physiological issues that you might have. And when I say an issue, it's not a bad thing, is we all get triggered or a hot button gets pushed. So when we know that we've been, pushed a little bit on our marriage, it's good that we know that in advance to take a little break, take a time out, hit the pause button and step away. And the way I like to encourage couples to think about this is using an acronym that was shared with me many, many years ago, but it's just the HALTS acronym, which stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed. So it's back to knowing ourselves. So we know when we get triggered,
Yeah.
and it's a physiological thing, meaning it's the blood system has kicked into a different gear. So it's not a mental thing. It's like our body's been hijacked temporarily with anger and frustration. So we want to know that and love our spouse by backing off.
Yeah, that's really good, and it's counterintuitive in another sense, particularly within the Christian community, because I've probably heard this quoted 100 times, and it's from the Bible of "Don't let the sun go down on your
Yeah.
anger," and I think that's too often taken to mean that if something comes up and someone pushes your button, you can't walk away from it. You have to deal with your
Mm-hmm.
anger right then, there. And that at times is not the right strategy. At times, you need to be able to step back. And how you do that, of course, is very important. But we need to know ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and we need to care for how we present ourselves to our spouse. And yeah, so that's very good.
Well, thank you. I'm really passionate about this particular topic because the more I've learned about how our brain works and our body, it does take 38 to 45 minutes for those chemicals, those fight or flight chemicals to dissipate in our bloodstream. So that's why, we encourage
Yeah.
couples to take a full hour, step away, regroup, and there's some questions to go through. It's like, what's the win-win solution in this particular thing? What made me so upset that I had to, yeah, what made me so upset
Right.
that I got this condition? So it's some self-reflective work, again, back to self-care.
Yeah, but as you say, the cortisol
Yes,
has to settle a bit, or else we're just not operating on our best.
you're literally right, Tommy. Part of our brain shuts down. So
Right.
you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's a great, real clear minefield that has like about 1,000 implications
Mhm.
to it.
It
So,
sure does.
okay. All right. Give me another one.
Yeah, the next one I have is managing expectations. Managing expectations. And so
Mm.
the principle that I like to share is all disappointments in life are a result of unmet expectations. So all disappointments in life are a result of unmet expectations. So
Mm.
the reason
Wow.
we get disappointed is we're expecting something different. So once that something different happens, that's when we start getting a little upset or going sideways. So part of the adventure of being married is to start understanding each other's expectations and just talking them out. So just once that disappointment comes, that's actually a gateway for what we're hoping for.
Right. And I'm sure that's some really sensitive communications, probably where, at a lot of times you come into play as helping to steer that kind of conversation where someone's needing to admit that they have an expectation which clearly the other person is not, or maybe even cannot fulfill. And yet they're having to admit, this is my expectation, whether it's from their original family
Mhm.
or, the concepts of culture or whatever. That's a raw conversation.
Yeah, Tommy, I think we can go a full hour on this one, but just like you said, the researchers say 50 to 75% of some of our issues are pulled in from our family of origin
Hmm.
or significant other relationships, and then we overlay them on our current relationship. So we have to kind of sort through that. And then we also, it starts bleeding into communications. Like, has it actually been communicated, accepted, and agreed upon by the spouse? So we might think we've done a good job of communicating, but sometimes we have not. Sometimes it's in our heads and we haven't even communicated it. That's
Yeah. And so I want to pull this out of marriage for a second because I want to kind of consistently come back to the thought that this is really about loving well,
mm,
because I've seen those same unmet expectations rear its head in friendships, where friendships go awry because one person has an expectation that this friend is going to be this in their life, and that friend either doesn't have that expectation or is incapable of meeting that expectation. The same thing can be true with parenting
yes.
and our children. So, this idea both of self care that we've already touched on and this idea of unmet expectations impacts every
Mm,
relationship. It impacts our relationships at work. What is our expectations of our boss or our employees?
mm,
It it pervades everything. And when we begin to realize that this unmet expectations is a paradigm that we need to revisit and say, what are the expectations that I have, reasonable or unreasonable, that I am laying on this relationship, on this friendship, on this child, on this employee. I think that's really critical. And of course, then it just becomes on steroids, when we talk about a marriage relationship.
Yeah, I think what you just said summarizes a lot of the things that I would want us to raise up in a conversation with a friend or maybe a manager or
Yeah.
especially our
Yeah.
spouse.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really good. All right, keep on going. Give me one more.
Oh, one more would be lack of intentionality within our relationships. So,
Hmm.
so what I mean by that is we just take our sights off sometimes the most important things to pursue other affections that are important. But once we start shifting our focus and our intentionality with the things that we should truly love, that starts getting diluted, and we start taking kind of our eyes off the things that are needed to nurture, to have our spouse feel cherished
Right.
and loved. And we just get the pursuit of other things in life, which are all normal and natural, but we got to right side them back.
Normal, natural, inevitable.
Yes.
The two that really I think are just glaring is career. When career takes a front seat to marriage, and I know that is a delicate balance with the demands that people have and the love that they have of their careers or whatever. But careers is one, and the other one that I see real regularly is parenting, where the moment someone has kids, that the kids completely supplant in priority the relationship. And then that builds up with one or two or three kids over 5, 10, 15 years and all the challenges of it. And now you've really lost your way and your center in what you originally said was the most important.
Absolutely, Tommy. Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah. So that's great. So I get to throw in
Yeah,
one now.
please.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, but
Yeah.
Tommy, what's one of yours?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of mine, which won't surprise people who have listened to this podcast or read my book or whatever, is busyness.
Mhm.
I really saw this in our marriage when we got, and I say we, I was the primary culprit in this, got completely overloaded and overloaded with good things. At the particular time, I was running 4
Mhm.
businesses. I was an elder in the church. I was teaching Sunday school. It was before I taught Sunday school on marriage at this point,
Yeah.
but I was teaching Sunday school and I was doing a lot of good things.
Mhm.
And I was completely exhausted. And I can just remember the vivid sense that I would wake up, I would garner all of my energy, and I would go out and I would pour myself out, the very best that I had of energy with a smile on my face and enthusiasm and effort and focus. And by the end of the day, I was completely spent. I would come in the door, and it was like when the door would close behind me, the smile would go
Mm.
off my face, and I had nothing
Mm.
left in
Mm.
the tank.
Yeah.
I had nothing left. And I wasn't, I wasn't, to be honest, it's not so much in my nature. I wasn't a mean person, but I wasn't a lot of fun
Mm.
to be around. And I wasn't particularly patient. And I probably wasn't mean, but I was probably real short fused
Mm.
and impatient. And had God not rescued us, had we
Mm.
not changed our ways,
Mm.
then I could have been one of those that everything looked good on the outside and our relationship, our marriage was imploding on
Mm.
the inside. And it was a function of not that I was a bad person
Mhm.
anywhere along, but if we are only giving the dregs of who we are, the, none of us are the dregs good enough to make a marriage thrive. And so the busyness, which has become um, absolutely norm in our culture, I think is choking the life out of our marriages. And it's doing it in a very slow
Mm.
way that is hard to even realize that's what's happening. But that busyness needs, I think, to be attacked in terms of what our marriage is, because that busyness is going to just eat away. It's going to eat away. And then all of a sudden the mind will go off.
Yes. No, that's I see that in pretty much every relationship that I'm working with in terms of the coaching. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, we try to look at that. And one of the things that we're aiming towards, if I could go into like a practice or a habit,
sure.
is to be able to start not only recognizing that we're tapped out, but on the proactive side is that we want to start saving some of our saving our emotional energy, especially for introverts. We want to be able to save our emotional energy for our spouse or our children or
Right.
our significant other. And we have to be super intentional about that and be focused and do that and not just talk about it, but do it.
Yeah, yeah, it's great, and I think that theme is going to carry through over the next 4 or 5 weeks because there is a lot proactively we can do to turn the Titanic
Yes.
around. That's this speed and culture. Because I always use the analogy that we're in a riptide
Yes.
in our culture, so we have to somehow turn that boat around and get out of that riptide. So we're going to be talking about that a lot. Another one that I put down that I think is worth mentioning is the inevitable storms of life.
Hmm.
There are there are difficult things that virtually every marriage will encounter over the life of many decades together. In our case, I'd say, we had a couple of really difficult seasons
Mm.
with businesses that
Mm.
were putting a tremendous stress, on me, but nothing was even close to the storm of when our daughter Perrin was diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
So if you don't if a couple doesn't gird themselves up with positive strength in their relationship, positive communication patterns, positive self care, then when those storms come, they'll capsize the boat. And that's what I know statistically that there are not a lot of marriages that survive the death of a child. It's
Mm.
a fairly low percentage. But, it's often the storms which take either one down or take the relationship down because it puts so much stress. So we have to be in a good place for when the storm comes. So we can't do anything about the fact that the storms will come, but we can enter into our relationship knowing that the time will come when the storms come. And are we prepared? Are we ready? Are we strong for when those storms come?
Yeah, absolutely. The image of being on a boat on a storm, comes to mind. And yeah, we have to have the right gear ready to pull out
Yeah.
when those fierce winds come and the rain comes pelting down.
Yeah.
And so I would love to go deeper with you on that now or in subsequent
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep on diving, I think, inevitably back into some of these minefields. So throw out one more for me, and then in the interest of those who are patiently listening to this, we'll switch to the other side of the coin.
Yeah, I think it would be a lack of affection, and I
Mm,
think it's all tied. I'm a holistic thinker, and so I think you are too, Tommy. But it's we can't really look at each of these issues in a silo. They're all interconnected, and that's the beauty of the relationship. They're all connected. So on the affection side, is that are we supporting our wives with our significant others with their affections that build them up? And we'll talk about that using maybe the five love languages, is which I use because they're very accessible and
right.
they're rich. So I think I would like to throw that out as a minefield that we're easing up on being affectionate towards one another.
Yeah, that's great. And what we're going to talk about in that five love languages is the breadth of the word affection.
Hmm.
Because unfortunately, that word affection, as with the word intimacy, has been hijacked to
Hmm.
mean a very narrow thing. And it's so much more important to recognize the breadth of how we communicate or withhold affection in a relationship. So stay tuned for the
Yes.
next episode for kind of a deep dive into that. All right, so we probably won't be able to spend quite as much time on this, but I do think it's really important. I want to give a little bit of a vision for people, again, both in their friendships and in all of the other
Mm.
relationships. What are some of the characteristics that seem to be present in the healthiest relationships, or in this case, in the healthiest marriages. And I do want to just say, because you mentioned just a second ago about, husbands towards their wives,
Mhm,
you know, this is very, very much both sides on the minefields and on the healthiest things.
mhm,
It's a two-way street. There is just as much challenge for wives to exercise this care towards their husbands, and it is just as important for husbands to do this
mhm,
with their wives. So we need to be aware that we are both integral in participating in the health or
mhm.
unhealthiness of our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in some ways, I want to take those minefields and flip them. But would you like us to go deeper there, Tommy, or would you want us to maybe look at other characteristics?
You go wherever you want.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just look at my notes here just for 1 second. So, what the notes I'm looking at is I use a methodology called Prepare Enrich that many of you may have heard of, but it really looks at 11 categories of marriage. And typically, we think about marriage in limited terms. So, the reason I like this methodology is because it expands our vision.
Right.
So it gives like
It's
11
great.
categories. Is that okay if I share
Yeah,
those 11?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So those 11
And we can
categories,
put these in the show notes too.
absolutely.
Just list them so people can refer back to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer your question,
Yeah.
healthy marriage and relationships have good communications. We share our feelings and we understand each other. That's like duh.
Okay.
Okay, we're really good at handling conflict resolutions. We're able to discuss and resolve differences. And to answer your question more concretely, this sounds like a cliche term when we say we have to work for a win-win solution, but I think in significant relationships, that is true because anytime your partner loses or I lose, it's a win-loss. So we're always seeking back to our pursuing love and doing the right next thing, and is to always work towards a resolution where both parties feel really good about as a win-win.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just throw in a thought that, because I love the concept of a win-win, and it's so applicable in business and it is in relationships. I think the misconception sometimes is that a win-win has to be a big, huge, perfect win on both sides, and often that big, huge, perfect win on both sides is not possible. The win is saying, okay, I'm good with this because I know that I'm good and you're good. We're both on the positive side of normal. And in some really difficult challenges, being on the positive side of even is a win-win. It may not be a vastly perfect win-win where we're all just jumping up and down, but it's still a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be using a baseball analogy, just a good single.
Yeah.
That's somewhat sometimes we need it. And Tommy, taking your long view of a relationship, hey, you know what? Sometimes that win-win looks like a 90-10 kind of situation, but guess what? It's going to be 90-10 the other way around, in another subsequent win-win dialogue. So I think over time, there's a beautiful reciprocity in relationships
Yeah.
that we can honor each other, knowing that in God's providence, there's a mutual respect and admiration for the win-win.
All right, so let me give a trite, slightly humorous example of a win-win. I am not the neatest person in the world, just by a little. And so early on in our marriage, Weezy and I had to think about, a kind of division of labor and, who would do what. And of course, I didn't want her to necessarily do everything. Most everything would have been fine, but not everything.
Mm,
Just joking.
yeah.
So one of the kind of the issues that we talked about was who's going to make the bed.
Mm,
So, I mean, it's a classic. It's got to be a win lose. Someone's making the bed, they're losing. Someone's not having to make the bed, they're winning. And so we had to figure out, how are we going to navigate who is going to make the bed? So we arrived at a solution of the last person in the bed made the bed. So, if you slept in, you were going to make the bed, but you got to sleep in. If you didn't sleep in, you got to avoid making the bed. And we would have jokes instances where we'd kind of wake up at the first time at the same time, and we would quickly see who got the foot on the floor first, knowing the other person had to then, make the bed. And so it wasn't in a sense a win-win because I made the bed a lot more than I was used to
Hmm.
making it. But I went, okay, this is totally livable, and this is a decent win-win way of resolving something.
I love that story. Thank you. I really do, because it leads into another characteristic of healthy marriages I see is that we truly enjoy each other's personalities and we embrace each other's quirkiness.
Yeah,
We're able to be friends and laugh at some of the things that we do well. I mean, the silly things that we do
yeah,
that deserve a chuckle. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm with you
exactly.
on that, Tommy. That's
Yeah.
great.
Okay, great. All right, keep on.
So the other area would be, finances. Finances is a big area. So successful couples have a good way of communicating how they're going to allot their limited resources and I encourage couples to do like maybe weekly or a monthly meeting around budgeting and spending and priorities and so that's one thing I would love to see
Yeah,
in healthy marriages, and that's tied to mutual goals, right? We might want to match up our mutual goals
right.
with our finances.
Yeah, and that issue can rear its head even in couples that have all the money in the world, so to speak. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, folks. Whether they're high end or low end, we are going to have tussles with money if we're not careful.
yeah, great.
Yeah, I think I'd love to hear something else from you, Tommy, in terms of that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have seen as a characteristic of healthy marriages is a particular attentiveness.
Mm,
I think that with time in a marriage, we can get really sloppy with our attention and the degree to which we're listening, the degree to which we're giving eye contact,
mm,
body language. And I find often the couples that I resonate with, and I'm often kind of paying attention to couples who are a little further down the
mhm,
road than us.
mhm,
What I find myself paying attention to is those few rare couples that seem to still kind of delight in one another
mhm,
and still really give attention as almost as if they can't wait to hear what that person has to say. There's an attentiveness which is, with the ears, it can be with the touch, it can be in very special ways. But I guess it's not so much, it's something that when I see it present, I know I'm looking at a healthy marriage. And
mhm,
so I guess in that sense, it's something that if I want to make my marriage more attentive, I've got to be alert to how easy it is to kind of just check out
mhm,
with this person that's around all the time and you're not listening and you're absorbed in your phone or you're absorbed in a sporting event or a
mhm,
TV show or you're just tired. That kind of intentional attentiveness is something that's special. I mean, it's on that really
mhm.
special end of a great
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, Tommy, that's great. And I would argue that those are formed by healthy habits.
Yes.
So, at a practical level, because we want to be at a practical level, at a certain time during your evening or day with your, you know, I encourage couples phones down, flip them over, charge them, just like you park a car, park your phone,
Right.
right? You turn off the TV, turn off the radio. You're just really locked into the other person, really, really, really locked
Yeah.
in. And there's this doctor who's a neurophysicist, or excuse me, a neurochemist, came up with the four S's in healthy couples. They're seen, they're soothed, they're safe and secure. Seen,
Seen, soothed,
safe,
safe, and secure.
right.
Ah,
So we want to make sure that we're endeavoring as we love each other, that we're seeing each other not only physically, but
yeah,
at a heart level, that we're able to soothe each other when we're facing the challenges of life,
yeah.
and that
I,
we feel safe.
I love that. And I will add another one in that I think is, I just personally believe is really important. And it takes that seen, soothed, safe, and secure, but it actually takes it another level. I've seen that. I think a sign of the healthy marriages is there ones in which the couple are regularly encouraging
Mm,
one another. That's a proactive type of thing. And it is so easy to fall into sarcastic habits
mhm,
of how we communicate and nitpicking. And yet, if we could build the habit of being encouragers of our spouse, the thing is, it not only lifts them up, it lifts the person up that is encouraging, because it's that whole thing that it takes one positive comment to overcome five negative comments. Well, if we don't proactively say, you know I want to be an encourager, and think about that self-care, that time when the person is really down on themselves, sometimes the only thing that we can do is encourage them.
mm.
And so I think intentionally and proactively and almost aggressively, but sincerely encouraging our spouse and doing that is a sign of a healthy marriage, and it's also a stimulus for a healthy marriage.
Love that. That should be a daily practice, a daily habit.
Yeah,
Just encouraging our spouse, sharing one thing you're grateful about or
yeah.
for, and sharing a daily compliment. I think that's a wonderful habit.
Great. Well, let's do a little bit, if we can, of almost just a quick lightning round. If there are two or three others that we just want to at least get a sentence in of positive things, are there any other things that are just kind of jumping out that are worth mentioning?
Yeah, I think one of my clients said this, and so I want to share it with the community because I think it really is an important reminder, is that if you want to be loved, you got to be loving. If
Mm,
you want to be heard, you want to listen well. If you want to be supported, support the other person. So it's sort of like being the peace that you want to see in the world.
yeah,
You know, do that. Jesus says it in a different way. Take the log out of your own eye before you see the speck in the other. So that's part of also the self-care,
sure. The golden rule:
self-regulation.
do unto others as you would have them
Exactly.
do unto.
So
Yeah,
that would be a lightning
yeah, that's great.
share with me.
So a lightning one for me is compatibility. I think that couples that play together stay together,
Mhm.
and pray together stay
Yeah.
together. But if you can find some compatible interest,
Mhm.
or even work to build some compatible interest that you really enjoy, it just goes a long way towards a healthy relationship.
Yeah, another one is I've said this earlier, but I think it's worth repeating, is that you can really only change what you can change. So change what you can change, which is only in your purview of control. And in relationships, we're wanting to change the other person, but let's take that same focus and energy that we want to change the other person and just
Yeah.
look at ourselves and do a deep dive there.
Yeah, that's great. I'll just add one: having healthy rhythms. It goes
Mm,
to the habits that you're
mm,
talking about. But I think that if you can have three or four things that are, you know, healthy rhythms that have become foundations for your marriage, it's great. As trite as it is, date nights together, going out and having fun together, having a good meal, enjoying one another is important. We'll talk about it later, but I think practicing the Sabbath.
mm.
I think taking vacations. and not 100% of them with the whole family and with the extended family,
Mm.
but taking a vacation with just your spouse. I think if we committed and said, okay, at least once a year, we're going to do this. At least once a week, we're going to do a date night. At least this, and we set those rhythms in place, it's like that can calm a whole lot of negative things that can tend to build up.
Yeah, just to support what you're saying, the more the couple talks, the less conflict is typically happens because we're there together,
Yeah.
we're sharing, we're talking, we're able to just enjoy life and things don't get bottled up and resentment doesn't build.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just making sure we have that sacred space. I love that word rhythm. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Tommy.
Yeah. Great. All right. So we're going to try to close this down because we got 5 weeks to be,
Okay.
and we don't want people to get tired of listening to us.
Yeah.
They might already be. But so I want to just end with what is one first step that a couple could do that is listening to this to get the ball rolling towards an improving, growing marriage?
Yeah, just get your team together.
Mm,
Work on getting your team, and I think that would be one thing. Just asking for support. Your friends. What are you reading? Make sure that we started reading things that are supporting of a marriage and healthy communications. So I'd say just get started by building your team.
yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I think we're going to end it there. I've got a whole bunch of things, so I can't even put it down. But I actually agree with, get your team together, and I think if I was going to add something,
Please.
I would just say start the conversation
Ah,
with your
yes,
team.
yes.
You start it
There
now.
you go.
So I think that's great. Well, our next episode is going to be a fun conversation, but I have known so many people for whom the five love languages that we're going to talk about is a game changer in terms of their relationships, not just with their spouse, but with others. And you may know the love languages well, but I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the nuances that's really worth talking about. So I hope if you've enjoyed this, I hope you will share this episode with others, get everybody on the bandwagon of this kind of 5-part series, because there's going to be a lot of great material, not only for your marriages, but in your parenting, in your friendships, even in your relationship with God. So I think this honestly is worth sharing. I'm excited about it. Tom's going to be with me for 3 of these 5 episodes. So we'll be having some great conversations. So
Yeah.
thanks for listening. Share it with friends, and we'll see you next week.